So the things I have here, I believe, are pretty obscure, with some being helpful and most not being useful whatsoever. With that said, there are going to be some of you here that are going to know at least one of these. In which case, congratulations. I would say don't go into the comments and tell me, actually Fact 4 is common knowledge. I learned that 3 minutes into installing EU4. But I can't stop you doing that. So have fun, I guess. Instead though, feel free to tell me which ones of these, if any, you knew about before. Anyway, as always, before we begin, a like on the video would be appreciated, and a subscription would be amazing. We're getting awfully close to 10k, so hitting that would be insane. Anyway, enough self-shitting, let's begin with super end tags, and more specifically, Viti. Now, I'm sure you all know about end tags, countries like France, or the Ottomans, that are unable to form other nations. This is quite a shame, because for example France can contain some pretty cool end of the game buffs that would be really cool to use. However, if you ever do form France for those bonuses, you can't form other countries for, well, their missions, or any other bonuses that they may have. The exception to this is of course super end tags. The classic examples are things like the Holy Roman Empire. If you're able to go ahead and press the final decision on the Holy Roman Empire menu, you'll be able to unite the Holy Roman Empire into one country. That final country, the HRE, is a super end tag, because it can be formed by end tags. Another example of super end tags is of course the Roman Empire, as even though we're an end tag, such as France here, we're actually able to go ahead and form it. There we go, we can become the Roman Empire. Isn't that cool? Now, the thing is, when it comes to super end tags like this is, well, there is a more powerful version of them. They're still called super end tags. I mean, super end tags are a colloquial term. But the tag that I want to highlight here today is actually Fiji. A tag so relevant that you didn't realize that this isn't Fiji, this is Fiji. Because if we become Fiji primary culture and move our capital to the islands, well, we can actually go ahead and unite Fiji to form, well, Viti. That's the localization of that name. Viti is even more unique as a super end tag because not only can it be formed by things like the Holy Roman Empire and the Roman Empire, Viti itself isn't actually an end tag. Now, before you start thinking, ooh, does that mean I can form an end tag, then form Viti, then form something else? Well, not quite. See, Viti, even though it isn't an end tag itself, doesn't get rid of the flag that you set when you form an end tag. If you're ever an end tag or you form an end tag, you set the country flag has been an end tag, meaning that you can never form another end tag again, or another country that has the requirements is not an end tag in its formation, which is the vast majority of them. But there we go, a true relic of Leviathan. Viti stands as the true mastermind of everything. But back onto the topic of Rome itself, another interesting thing that I think a lot of people don't realize now, because it practically never comes up as an issue, is the fact that the AI will never form Rome. That's not to say they necessarily can't. There's nothing in the game condition that prevents the AI actually forming Rome. Now what's interesting is the bottom AI weight towards forming Rome. As you can see in the game code here, the AI decision to form Rome is multiplied by 0. They will never form Rome. The AI is the ultimate anti-Romaboo. Even when presented with the opportunity to form Rome, if they met every single condition, they will never press the button. They have a weighted chance of, well, forming the Roman Empire of 0. Which I don't think is very well known, and I don't know why Paradox has done this. I mean, how many times have they had runaway AIs restoring the Roman Empire? To the point where they had to go out of their way to write a condition for the AI weight for the formation of Rome to be set to 0. They could have just left it at 1 or not even put the condition in at all. Paradox went out of the way to prevent the Roman Empire being restored by an AI. What's worse is things like the Holy Roman Empire don't have this. The AI is glad to form that if you've seen any of those super long 5,000 year time lapses. By the year 3000, the AI is finally able to revoke the HRE. However, specifically, Rome cannot be formed by an AI. But now that we're on the topic of things that the AI doesn't do, let's now discuss probably the most useful thing in this video for you. And that is the AI's decision to take colonial ideas, namely exploration or expansion. The AI's weight to take exploration or expansion is multiplied by 0 if they're a subject. And I don't think a lot of people realize this. This does mean that if, for example, you're playing as Castile and you want Portugal to colonize, when you get the Iberian wedding, which gives you the restoration of Union Casas Belli in Portugal, as evident here, you want to make sure you don't rush ahead with this if you want Portugal to colonize, as by making them a junior partner within your personal union, before they're able to take 2 idea groups, they're never going to pick exploration expansion. See, the AI Portugal will basically guaranteed to go exploration expansion, unless you vassalize them before they're able to do so, meaning that if you want to prevent them colonizing, you can by making them a subject. However, if you want the Portuguese to colonize for you, which I think in most cases you do, you want to wait off until admin tech 7 is taken by Portugal, as once they've selected an idea group, they're not going to drop it, and once they've selected an idea group, they have no problem putting monarch points into it. It's just the actual selection process is multiplied by 0 if they're a subject. But now that we are talking about colonies and weird colonial regions, we're going to move on to fun fact number 4. And that is, of course, the Canaries. Now, the Canaries sit in a very interesting placement, because if you had to put the Canaries onto a continent, where would you put the Canaries? Now, if we go to the areas map mode, we can see that the Canaries are very clearly part of, well, the West African Sea area and within the, well, Maghreb region. In fact, in the regions, we can also see that they're part of the Maghreb region. And on the subcontinents, we can also see they're part of the, well, North African subcontinent. So far, so good. But this betrays a really fascinating decision made by Paradox. Namely that even though the subcontinent is North Africa, as you can see here, the Canary Islands, namely Gran Canaria and Tenerife, are both on the continent of Europe. This means that Castile actually does not fit the requirement from game start to be present on 2 continents, as they're not present on 2 continents, with both Tenerife and Gran Canaria being on Europe, meaning that all of Castile is conveniently located on just 1 continent. Portugal would suffer a similar fate, as Madeira is actually on the continent of Europe, as is the Azores Islands. However, they of course are actually able to meet the Age of Discovery requirement to be present on 2 continents, since they do own Ceuta. But for me, the Canaries and Castile are by far the weirdest decision ever. Not only are they within the Maghreb and North African region, which would make you think that they should be part of Africa, they're not, they're in Europe. And this makes even less sense if you consider continental plates, because you shouldn't consider continental plates to be honest, but even if you do, they're still very much not on the European plate. In no situation really are the Canaries inside Europe. The only reason I could think of such a decision is to soft nerf Castile by preventing him to get the age ability right away. Although even then, it's not exactly a difficult thing for Castile to achieve, because Morocco is, well, right there. And even if the Castilians don't invade Morocco, a huge part of the whole Castilian game plan is colonizing. So they just colonize a province and get going anyway. Now, there are other weird examples. I think my favorite example of weird borders in terms of continents is actually going to be the state of Darkadir. Because if you take a look at the 3 provinces in the north of Darkadir, we can see that all 3 of those are on the continent of Europe. However, Urfa, which is within the same state as most of Darkadir, is actually on the continent of Asia. But yeah, note to reiterate, a European state inside a African region within an African subcontinent within a European continent. Thank you, Paradox. Very cool. And for our 5th entry, we'll be returning to the game code, because I've talked about states already for a bit here when I was talking about which, well, subcontinents they belong to, but provinces, namely land provinces, aren't the only things within states. So, for example, if I take a look at a random state here like Toledo, we're going to see that there are 5 provinces inside of it, which are assigned to a state. There's also some kind of a soft rule within Paradox that you don't put more than, well, I think 5 or 6 provinces within a state. It can be broken, you can have more, and mods do that pretty much all the time, but that's kind of a rule that Paradox tends to follow. However, there is one place where they break it, and that is, weirdly enough, sea tiles. See, there is actually within the game configurations, when we talk about states, sea tile states. Namely, if we take a look at something like the Baltic Sea, we can see that all of these sea tiles are actually all part of the same Baltic, well, sea area. My question is, why did Paradox go out of their way to create this classification? It's not like these states can ever do anything. I can't put the dev edict onto the Baltic Sea, and, you know, I can't get 20% more manpower out of the ocean. And I'll be honest, if the Baltic Sea starts getting devastation, I think we have bigger problems as humanity. It's still there and classified. Now, for things like the Canaries reason as to maybe we're having them as Europe as a soft nerf to Castile, I can at least try and think of a reason as to why they do this. But I don't see why you would want to make states for, well, things like the Baltic Sea. It doesn't even dictate where, if they're inland seas or not. That is dictated separately with a separate classifier, right? They just grouped provinces relatively arbitrarily within things like the Baltic Sea. Now, one thing I was thinking of is, for example, things like the Swedish missions, which require you to own provinces around the Baltic Sea. However, they don't scope to the Baltic Sea. Instead, they scope to a custom set of provinces made around the Baltic Sea. So basically, it's just an arbitrary list called provinces called borders that border Baltic Sea, into which they've put a bunch of countries into that list. And then after doing that, they've basically gone and said, hey, Sweden own X amount of provinces within the area to complete the mission. I realized I could just take a look at the mission and show you what I mean. The entire Baltic coastline, this is a custom localization. This doesn't scope to the Baltic coastline. This scopes to an arbitrary set of provinces within here. You can especially tell because, for some reason, the Baltic coastline does not include this province here, despite it very clearly bordering what could be considered Baltic provinces, or at least that would need to be considered Baltic provinces for these provinces to qualify. Furthermore, owning the Baltic coastline requires owning this province here, which is actually on the, well, North Sea state. And that is not the Baltic coastline, yet it is still part of the scope. So yeah, if you have absolutely any idea as to for what reason Paradox would create sea states that contain loads of setars as part of their weird classification, feel free to tell me in the comments. But with that said, that is all I have time for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.